Welcome to Wait, What? You mean I'm an author? My name is Scott Ryan, and I'm going to be hosting this next hour where we have authors who are publishing for the first time. You know, when I was 10 years old, I held hands with the neighbor girl. Uh, and it was a pretty big deal. But then she told the other neighbor girl that she liked holding hands with this boy at school better. Now, I don't know how I was supposed to react to that, but I reacted by going home and writing my first book, which was called Life in the Neighborhood. It was 5 chapters long, and somehow it was only on one page that I folded so it had a book, but it was my first book. So was I an author then? When I graduated from college, I wrote about working at Arby's, and I sent it out. I listened to the Beatles paperback writer. No one ever responded. So was I an author then? I don't know. It took all the way to I was 47 years old when I sent an email off to Bear Manor Publishing to say that I had interviewed the entire cast of 30-something, and I thought there should be a book about 30-something. And he responded with Sold. And I published my first book, 30-something at 30. It was in a library. I was an author then, right? Because other people had my book. Maybe I was when I was 10, maybe it was when I was 47. But my name is Scott Ryan, and I'm an author. And today we have 4 people who get to say this now. So we're going to go around, we're going to hear their stories, we're going to hear what their first book is, and I'm going to beg you, all of you who are watching this, to forget about Stephen King's next book. Who cares about John Irving's next book? These are people who are going to be so excited for you to buy their book. And I'm so excited to hear about their journeys in becoming an author. We're going to start with you, Kellyanne. Tell us what you wrote and sort of like your background into becoming an author.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here at the Fall Book Fest. Well, I have a strange story because I only started writing in March of 2022. So my adult life, I was in a corporate job, and then I moved into the preschool arena, and I was a teacher and an administrator. And then after that, I was really involved in family properties, DIY, upfitting, and then all the bills and everything that go with owning multiple properties. So that's my world. It wasn't until 2022, early spring, that I started to hear poetry in my head. Started to write down the poetry. I thought I was having an only child when the first poem came. My Name is Mountain, my first book. Then 30 more came. And within 14 days, I actually had 27 of that number ready to go, illustrations and everything in 14 days.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. I didn't even own a computer when I started writing. I had an iPad, a 2017 iPad at that, and an iPhone. So I didn't even have technology. But I did it. And actually all 31 were ready in 3 weeks, but I like that 27 in 14 days because I feel like that's pretty darn cool. And before I said I had got to get these in the hands of children. So I did hybrid self-publishing. And I wrote them really first 2 weeks of April. And then I had all of them published by the end of September of the same year.
Yeah, I'm still not embarrassed that I started this thing without knowing her story, that I started when I was 10 and it took me I was 47. It's fine. I'm not going to hold it against you, Kellyanne. It's fine. I have no ill will towards you at all. That's a great story. Jonathan, can you top that? Now we're topping each other.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to top anyone.
No.
So, but let's see. I had always wanted to write a fantasy novel throughout my life, and but it was a vision on the back burner for most of my life, and I pursued academic research for a long time, and I became a spider biologist, and I traveled all over the world studying spiders, and in remote locations all over the world: Madagascar, Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Mozambique, the neotropical rainforests. And along the way, that sounds really nice, except for you spend a lot of time by yourself, and so or with few people, and so epic fantasies and fantasy novels, listening to them while I was driving, reading them when there was no power to be had, became sort of a pastime of mine that became hypertrophied with the amount of time that I had on my own, and I determined that I was gonna be an author at some point, and then my life took a right-hand turn. So, at the height of my career, I was poached many times by various sorts of academic institutions all over the world, and I became subject number one in a huge international scandal. It caused me a huge amount of psychologically, and when that was transpiring, I thought I was arrested. I wasn't allowed to do any, not literally arrested, but like figuratively arrested, and unable to move forward in the various avenues of life that I'd identified with, and that allowed to substantiate who I was as a person. And then while that was happening, I thought, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Like I'm still collecting a paycheck, thank God. I'm still alive. My health is okay, and I have all this free time. What am I going to do? And then and naively throughout my 30s, I thought, I'm going to go write my fantasy novel series in my 40s. Well, turns out my 40s happened about 5 years earlier and by gunpoint. And then I acted. So, I began to write at around 2020, and began to write a fantasy series. And I wrote one novel and then a second and a third. But I edited it for years. I drafted the first one in about 5 months, obviously not very swiftly, and then edited it for the next several years, and fought very hard to get a conventional publisher. And then at the last year, maybe about 18 months ago, I received a couple of offers from small presses or medium-sized presses. But then, I'm a numbers kind of guy, and so I started to run the numbers, like, what works here, and what are they offering, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the last, I decided that self-publishing was probably the best bet for me individually, and I recruited talent to assist me in that endeavor, from people who worked for the Big Five, and I refined my book to a point where I was happy with it, and I'm nature's most neurotic creature, so it took a lot of finagling for me to get to that moment. And then I'll be releasing it on October 3rd, and it's about a dark fantasy about a fictitious world where evil intellectuals have subjugated society under the auspices that they alone can save it. Strictly fiction, right?
That's another great story. And I like that you said you traveled the world looking for spiders and it was great. Like, no, that's not what I do on my vacation. That's not like, oh, I know, let's go look for spiders. Yeah, we'll get back to that. Doug, let's hear your story. How did you become an author?
Well, I go back to the distinction between being a writer and being an author, because I've been a writer my whole life, literally. In fact, Scott, I think that little girl who wanted to hold the other guy's hand, she went over to my house and held my hand. I apologize.
Oh
No,
my God.
but I was
suspected it was you.
I know. I am a home wrecker. Anyway, when I was very little, I remember my mother had a toy, just a little wooden shoe, like a Dutch wooden shoe. I don't know why. We never left the country. We had no Dutch connection, but I wrote stories in a notebook about a little Dutch boy who turned it into a sailboat. It was a wooden shoe that had a mast, and I wish I had that book too. I wrote all these children's stories, and my first oral history report, in the 6th grade, we did the Huntley-Brinkley report in 1066, and I played Chet Huntley. And I got laughs, and that's all I wanted. That's all I wanted to do, was write for the Marx Brothers. And I had a long career writing. I've worked as a professional writer for 50 years, basically, which has been great. As a newspaper columnist, on radio, for television, for the networks, I'm Married with Children and WKRP, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, an author was somebody who wrote books. My personal Mount Everest is long form fiction, which I consider to be the highest form of writing. I mean, maybe qualified only by popular music. If you can write a song that the whole world sings and people in foreign languages know the lyrics, then I think you've achieved something pretty amazing in 3 minutes. But in 1998, I had a story idea. The night that Frank Sinatra died, I had a friend of mine whose father died the same night. And it occurred to me, both men were 82 years of age, that one death is satellite news ricocheting around the globe, and the other life is in the back of the newspaper by the mattress ads, and you have to pay to put them there. So I started working on a book called Frank's Shadow. There it is. In 1998. And I wrote about 140 pages, and then I hit a wall because I was free form writing, and I wrote myself into a dead end. I needed a deep, dark family secret that the son who goes home to bury his father and realizes he knows everything about Frank Sinatra, but almost nothing about his own father of substance. I needed this family secret that he discovers, and everything that I came up with was either lost or stolen or awful, and usually both. So it sat for a very long period of time while I went on doing all the other things that I do in my life. And then, as so often happens, while reading something else, the light bulb went off when I said, this is it. This is what the secret should be. And then I couldn't wait. So I retired I had a long career as a talk radio show host. And when I retired in 2018, December 2018, on January 4th of 2019, I started working again on the manuscript. And here we are now in July of this year. The book was published and it's out in the stores. We've been on a book tour. It's been a great and very satisfying experience.
I love that. And you didn't say, did you get a major publisher, a medium publisher, or you self-published?
This is a hybrid publisher with Greenleaf Book Group out of Austin, Texas, which I found to be sensational. I'm 60. I'll be 66 years old shortly. And a couple of things struck me. I was never going to live long enough to go through the hoops that were required. I started the traditional process. And I knew a lot of people in the publishing industry from having literally 1,000 authors on the radio shows over 20 years. But it was always from the marketing side. And when I discovered Greenleaf, I thought this company is world-class. My experience with them has been sensational. They delivered everything they said they were going to deliver with terrific editorial assistance. So I've been really happy, but mostly the clock was ticking at my age and with my media contacts, which were going to help me enormously in marketing the book, were expiring. People that I knew in the newspaper, radio, and television business were retiring or being fired through attrition. So I had to do it now. It was now or never. And fortunately, I got in just under the wire.
Yeah, it sounds like you did it my way. I apologize.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. Why?
That's okay. You're allowed.
Please.
You're allowed.
You had to do one. It was sitting there. Em, let's hear your story.
Okay. Hey, everybody. It's good to see you and meet you. Wow, I'm in such great company. My story is that I never thought I was an author or a writer. I thought I knew I was a reader. I was an avid reader. I would read everything, anything, especially I loved queer fiction and memoir and just was reading all the time. Bestseller lists to obscure things that my friends would give me. But I was kind of always writing also along the way, but just little things here and there, little things just for myself or for people that I loved and would give it to them. And then the pandemic happened. And in the pandemic, I should also say I'm a psychotherapist and I work with a lot of people a lot of my clients are artists and writers. And I would look at them and I would say oh, well, they're writers. They're the ones who are doing it, not me. But meanwhile, I was writing. So there's this disconnect between, how I saw myself and how I saw them. And so I'm writing, and I did write some things academically. I'm also a professor in psychology. So I, published some academic things and some worked on a textbook and those kinds of things. But I was like, that's not writing. I'm not an author. Right? These ideas that I had in my head. And so the pandemic happened. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to write something that I love about what I love, which is pop culture and psychology, my two favorite topics. So I started writing articles about my favorite TV show, Twin Peaks, which is a cult TV show from the 90s. And I submitted it to be published on a website and that I revered and read everything on. And I was like, there's no way, they're not gonna, why would they care about this? And I got this email back and it was like, what? They're gonna publish it? And it was that moment for the first time that I was like, oh, maybe this is legitimate. Like maybe legit, I'm also a writer. Nah, I can't possibly. Nah, right? The self-doubts. And then they published another one and another one and another one. And that helped me realize like, oh, this maybe something is here. And then I had an idea for a book going for a long time. And I would write on a little bit here and there and I put it away. This is not really ever going to happen, never going to happen. And then I was like, what if it did happen? And what if I manifested? And I was like, okay, how can I manifest? And so I attended a self-publishing workshop, which is, I was thinking maybe I would self-publish. I didn't know. But I was kind of sneaky because the person who was leading the workshop was someone I knew I wanted to publish with because they had their own indie publishing press. And so I just attended like, oh, I'm going to, just talk. I'm just going to attend the workshop and be a participant in this, that, and the other. And I pitched the book at the workshop very sneakily. And the book is about movie sequels from the 80s and 90s and the psychology of why we love movies from that time period. It's called Comfort Sequels, the psychology of movie sequels from the 80s and 90s. And it comes out next year because I went to that workshop, I manifested, I met the person that I wanted to meet and had conversation. And it turns out he was really excited about the book and like loved the idea and the concept. And we actually connected over Grease 2, which is why I'm wearing this shirt, which says Grease 2 was better. And you can feel free to disagree if you don't agree with that. But the book has different chapters devoted to movie sequels that I love from the 80s and 90s. And Grease 2 is the first one because I love Grease 2. The music is amazing. Everyone's like, jury's out on that, jury's out. That's fine. Watch the movie again after you read the chapter in my book and see if that changes how you feel about Grease 2, because I'll tell you what, it is a female empowerment story like you wouldn't believe. So that's how I became an author, and I'm sitting here with you all in this moment is because of that. And I think a lot of it is, for me, was getting past my own kind of self-doubt and narrative that I wasn't a writer and I was all along.
Well, I think you're a cool writer. So if I can make the my way joke, I'm gonna pick a song from Grease 2. Here's what I think is interesting about everyone's story is this idea that it's something that others do, or like, how do I get to this spot? And until you have this book in your hands, like, that's when you become this other thing, which I don't know if that should be that way, but it is. So I'm curious, I'm going to just throw this out. How have you guys felt about it being physical? I'd like to hear, I know, Em, your story's coming, but Jonathan, you go first. I mean, I'm just throwing it to you. Why does it matter that it's physical, that we touch this book?
I'm gonna take this hockey puck in a different direction than you might anticipate, and I can't give it away fast enough. Like, I spent so long thinking about these ideas and refining them and self-mutilating, in a psychological capacity over them, and fussing with all of the tiny little minutiae in the book to get it. And it was isolating when I'm writing this book. I wrote 1 million words in a fictitious world. When somebody asks you, what have you been working on today? It's very hard to communicate to them your plot, not 1 million words into that world. And so I felt so isolated, and it's hard to get, I struggled to get beta readers. I got a few beta readers, but I don't take them for granted. By the time the book finally was physically in my hands, I was just desperate to give it to anyone and try to and to share it with people. Like, the realism of my world and the thing, and was the ability to share it with other people and create a community around it, and like hear people critique it or have laudatory statements about it and everything in between. And that's it. The physicality of it is not what matters most to me, but it was about being able to exchange the ideas and the characters and the concepts and the critiques that are embedded within it, that are, like sometimes on the nose and sometimes less on the nose, with other people. So, I felt so isolated for such a big chunk of this, and I found writing to be an isolating endeavor personally, that reaching out and having virtual copies sent to other people, and have people send things back, and seeing reviews on NetGalley and things like that. That's really what's provided me the contact high at the last year, is that I get to share it with other people. And so every every hard copy that I've had, I've inadvertently ended up signing and giving away to somebody, being like, "Thank you for putting up with me for these last 3.5 years. This is my gift to you." God, I've given it all away. I can't even sell it now. I'm just giving it to people. So like, yeah, I've ordered more books, but I'm sure I'll be getting rid of them too. When people say, "Don't you want the last one?" I'm like, no, I lived with this all on my own for like 3.5 years. I've read this book before. This one's for you. So
that's very sweet.
me.
What about you, Kellyanne? What does it mean for you for it to be out there in the world?
Well, I don't know what you mean. Hugging them. I don't know what you're talking about. These, you mean thinking about that though, honestly, it was a little double-edged sword. You get the book, and you're like, yes, and then you go, oh, the book is printed. So this is a piece of my soul that is now physical. And for me, there was not a little bit of fear, but quite a bit of fear that came along with that realization. This is now in paper. And it's like, what is the response going to be? So it was mixed. There's excitement, but for me, for sure, being an unknown author and a new author, there was fear. The best part was when I shared one of the books with a 3-year-old child who tucked the book under his arm and marched around the house like this. And any adult who would read it to him, he would sit in their lap and it would be read to him. That was helpful.
Oh, that is very sweet. Doug, what's it like for you? Because you've had success in other endeavors, and now you have this physical thing. A radio show goes out and disappears.
Well, many years ago, I read I'm sort of an eclectic oddball reader. I'll read really obscure things. And one day I was sitting reading a 1950 edition of A Brief History of Norway. I picked up for 50 cents at a yard sale. And somewhere along the lines, lost in the fjords of ancient Norway, it occurred to me, I may be the only person on the planet who is reading this book at this time. And to me, that's really what the great satisfaction of having a physical reality of the book existing in the world is, that you never know, 50, 100 years from now, some nerd will be wandering around somewhere and stumble into this thing. And you just don't know. And I think that's the magic of it. So far, I mean, I've been I'm not counting on the book to make October's mortgage payment. So the money aspect of it, while it's nice and I'd love it to sell well, and it is selling pretty well, so I have no complaints across the board. But I wanted it to exist in the world because I felt like it's the only genuinely original story I've ever told. Most of the stories, especially in television writing, if you're working on an episodic television series, you're writing somebody else's character, somebody created with Married with Children or Full House or one of those shows, and you're executing somebody else's ideas. And with newspaper columns, you're generally working off of current events as the source material, whereas this is an original story with original characters that could only exist because they came through my head, just the way all of your work only comes through your head. So as a result, it means a lot to me. And I had my cousin's daughter took a picture at Penn Station in New York City, a place I spent half of my life commuting through, and Frank Shadow was in the book rack at Hudson Books at Penn Station, and that was such a thrill. It was such a thrill, and I don't know why. It's no different than if it's at Barnes and Noble or any place else, but the fact that my book was at the rack in Penn Station was just a real. It shocked me how exciting I found it.
Yeah, I can totally see that. You mentioned that you are a therapist and you study psychology, and I find that interesting that you then are taking that over to a sequel. Give us a little bit, because it kind of it almost makes sense a little bit to me that there would be some psychology between liking something that we've seen before. Can you give us a little pitch? And is that the
Yeah.
kind of stuff that you're writing about in your book?
Yeah, it is the kind of stuff I'm writing about in my book. Like, what makes it so compelling that we love a story so much we want more of it, right? That we want that story to be retold again, maybe exactly the same way in some cases, right? Or with just like a little bit of difference. You know, I think about like Grease versus Grease 2, right? You have the protagonist as Michelle Pfeiffer in Grease 2, as opposed to, so it's like it's flipping the script a little bit, right? It's a retelling. And psychologically, a lot of times that we want more of that. And my book is, each chapter is focused on a different movie sequel. And it's kind of, here I'm saying sneaky again, but it's kind of also a sneaky memoir, because each chapter tells a story about my life and how I related to each movie. And for me, growing up in a dysfunctional family system, movies were like my babysitters. Movies were, especially movie sequels, were like comforting, we're familiar, we're safe, we're predictable. I could watch them over and over and over again, right? The VHS, remember the VHS with the FBI warnings, like all that. It's all nostalgia all the time in this book. And so what specifically this book is for me is how comforting sequels were and are, and how I immerse myself in the movies. So that's my psychology part. And then I analyze some of the characters, you know, like what's going on in Batman Returns in terms of like what their true selves versus their false selves. You got, you know, Michael Keaton, right? And Michelle Pfeiffer. So Michelle Pfeiffer again. She should.
Yeah, I mean, Batman Returns. We only doing Michelle Pfeiffer sequels?
It's pretty much only my love for Michelle Pfeiffer. But, you know, I tell a story about dressing up like Catwoman and doing a trampoline routine. No big deal. But also, what is the true nature of who they are as characters? You know, are they Catwoman and Batman? Are those their true selves, or are they their false selves? And what does it mean? So I'm using like psychological, like this is all Winnicott. So it gets in there, but it's palatable. I promise. It's not a stuffy psychology textbook, because I've read plenty of those. It's like taking characters, taking stories, taking themes and arcs, applying them to my life, and then having a little bit of a fun, you know, analysis of them at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious how each of you started. You had never done this before. You know, we always think, I mean, there's a very obscure movie, Skin Deep, that probably no one's seen. It's a Blake Edwards movie, but there's a scene of John Ritter having to start a book, and the typewriter is there with the paper, and it's just so like classic what we think. But that isn't really, that's not how I started my book. I doubt that's how you started yours. Who wants to go first, and then we'll go around of stories of beginning this project. And Kelly, you win.
I was going to volunteer anyway. So, well, gosh, you know, for me, you know, the poetry kind of, you know, it was inside. I talk about when you do demo and you go to an old house and you're hoping for hardwood floors, and you peel back that shag carpet and you peel back the linoleum, and you're like, please let there be hardwood. So I had done a lot of work on myself, peeling back that, you know, purple shag carpet, and then maybe some orange linoleum, and there were hardwoods. So the hardwoods were my stories and my poems. So when I discovered that they were there, I also just heard them. So I was just typing away in my notes. Every time I heard a poem, I'm like, I got to write this down. So in a very short time, I wrote more than 31. I had to stop at 31, right? So it was almost like they bubbled up from within, but they were also raining down on me. Wow. So I'm walking the dog and I'm typing. You know, I'm making coffee and I'm typing. I'm trying to fall asleep and I'm typing. I'm doing the everyday normal things you would do and I'm typing. And I say that the poetry came as easy as breathing. It was that simple for me. It just hit like some kind of crazy universal blast. And I honored it. And I didn't even know what it was. I talk about my journey as being very Field of Dreams, very Kevin Costner, getting those intuitive hits. Back in the day, I don't know that we would have called those intuitive hits, but that's what they were. You know, plow your corn, build the baseball field. Men will come out of the corn and, you know, goats, right? So he didn't know what he was doing. He followed the hits.
That's exactly how my story goes. I just took one step at a time, one leap of faith at a time, and ended up with 31 published stories in a very short time. So I have nothing typical to offer. Nothing.
Well, the truth is none of us do. There isn't. If there was one path to it, then everyone would be doing it. Doug, what about you? How did you make that leap?
Well, for me, I think it was more of a logical progression because, as I said, I've been writing professionally for over 40 years. So, but the novel was a leap, a profound leap in this regard. That when it's like when you start, I think singers, comedians, painters, most artists start out as impressionists. You see somebody when you're young who inspires you, and you try to emulate that, and you learn technique necessarily that. But for you to achieve any real lasting art on your own, you have to leave your mentors and your inspiration behind and start to find your own voice. And in an odd way, it was writing the newspaper columns in the voice that I used hosting radio shows, where I was able to replicate in my newspaper columns sort of the humor and the whatever insights passed for wisdom that I was passing along. I was able to put it into a voice in short strokes in 850 word newspaper columns for the LA Daily News and Orange County Register, etc. And that helped me enormously when it came to writing Frank Shadow, because I wanted to write a first person present tense narrative set in 1998. But it allowed me to write with a strong voice that was identifiable, that could weave humor into tragedy and horror, even actually in some of the life choices my lead character, Danny McKenna, makes. But I couldn't have done this 30 years ago. All of the years and decades of previous writing, basically, that's why when I read, you read Great Gatsby and realize Fitzgerald was 23 when he wrote it, and you just want to strangle him. You want to bring him back to life just so you can murder him. That nobody, but there are so many young people that are born with original voices. You see it in, like, to me, like Billie Eilish. I look at that and go, how, at 19, at 14, that girl was writing things that are just, Amy Winehouse was the same thing. I'm so inspired. And my book is infused with a lot of pop music, obviously, because Frank Sinatra's a character in the book. It's not about him, but he's a parallel life. He's sort of like a timeline life. But I wasn't one of those people. When I started my writing career, I was an imitator. That's all. I was replicating, joke formats and writing punchlines for other people's characters and voices that were pre-established. And it really wasn't until I was able to merge my radio voice to my newspaper column voice that I think I sort of honed my narrative fiction voice.
I really like that. I mean, I think I can tell you're a good writer, because the fact that that's how you did it, that means you're on the right path. And I do think we have to write in our own voice. And what about you? I feel like you had these lofty ideas of what an author was. So how hard was it for you to put that first thing out there?
It was really hard. I mean, the first thing I did was ask people my age what are their favorite movie sequels from the 80s and 90s. And I just made like a huge list on a whiteboard, and I just kept collecting. And the people were like, Short Circuit 2, Gremlins 2, The New Batch. And I'm like, okay, cool. And then I looked at all of them and I was like, which ones were, and I had mine too, but which ones resonate for me? What are my stories to tell related to these sequels? And I just started, and Grease 2 was the obvious first place to start. And I just started, and I just kept going. And this book started with being much more of a traditional nonfiction analysis, sort of pop culture analysis book. And then it shifted into memoir, and I just followed its lead, and it did what it needed to do. And in terms of my writing process, I wrote this book I moved across the country during the course of writing this book. I was in an RV. We were living in California. We fled floods and fires. And I wrote my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 chapter in an RV. I wrote My Girl 2 somewhere in Nebraska on the way. I mean, everything. I had an idea about what it meant to be a writer. You had to like light a candle and create a sacred space to sit down with your computer and, make something artistically wonderful and perfect. And all of that went out the window. But the truth for me became writing when I had 10 minutes between clients. Writing for me became Kelly, and some of what you were saying about like on a walk, thoughts coming to you and making notes or having voice dictation. And that was really helpful to just break through any sort of preconceived notion about what it meant to write and how to write perfectly. And get to like really deconstruct my own perfectionism in that process, which was powerful and great. And then I started also, I'll just add briefly, I started asking some celebrities and talent for interviews for my book. And when they started saying yes, I got even more excited because I was like, oh my gosh, I get to like really immerse into these movies that I love so much by talking to people who were in them or worked on them, right? Like, so I got to talk to the guy who created, Steve Whitmore, who created Rizzo the Rat, the Muppet for The Great Muppet Keeper. I got to talk to Christine Ebersole, who was like a Broadway diva I was obsessed with, who was in My Girl 2. I got to talk to three of the T-Birds from Grease 2. Go back to Grease 2. Sorry about it. 3 of them, including the cool writer himself, Maxwell Caulfield. Like, I never would have dreamed that for myself, that level of immersion and excitement that came through in the writing process. So
I hope you asked him about Rex Manning Day from Empire Records.
I did.
Jonathan, what about you? I feel like you had to create this whole world and you're jumping into that. How was that for you? And you can take that hockey puck and knock it away. Answer any question you want.
I've lived in Canada before. I'm pretty good with a hockey puck. All right, so let's see. I wrote maniacally. I mean, I so desperately needed a distraction. I so badly needed to fall into a new version of myself, and I have enough energy for 10 people. I'm constantly moving. I run a half marathon every day. I have to be thinking. I write sometimes while I'm running if it's a flat surface and it's a long way. If I hear a good line, if I hear a good witticism, I hear a good snark. I'm like, I'm gonna write that down right now. And sometimes a garbled version of that makes its way into a manuscript and then gets filleted out later on in the massive culling phase. But I tried to move with a sincere element of intentionality, and I thought, okay, I've read a lot of fantasy. What do I like? What do I think are fun elements to it? What can I make fun of? What can I lean into? What can I have homages? Who can I wink at? And also, what are my strengths? What do I enjoy reading the most? What do I enjoy writing the most? And I think snappy dialogue and social tension, very lean conflict that always has profound social and emotional consequences for characters, and the sort of snark and the backhanded smug vampire sort of element was a thing that I always loved when I was reading fantasy. Like I just want to see the Queen of Thorns and Cersei like just sit around and have a lunch together where they throw barbs the entire time. That's what I'm living for. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna write the fantasy of my fantasies, and if I alienate everyone along the way, that's okay. I like Bjork, and so like and people can still get into that. And so I'm just gonna write the fantasy of my fantasies. I'm gonna try to make it lean. I'm gonna try to make sure a lean epic fantasy. I'm gonna try not to alienate everyone along the way if I can afford it, and I want to produce a product that I would have loved to have read and see how that goes. And I succeeded in that in the end. There was a lot of self-doubt along the way, but world building was only at the last. So I know a lot of fantasy authors start with a very elaborate concept of their world and then find a character. I was like, okay, we're going to start off with a character, with a problem, with a set of relationships, and then we're going to build the microcosm out from there, because no one's going to care about the evolutionary ecology of these lizards if I if I don't first, I don't know, give them a reason, like a social tension, something they can relate to. I'm like, I'm going to give a troublesome mother, and everyone's got a troublesome mother in one way or another, and I'm going to start off with that, and we're going to build it out from there, and I'm going to make these characters relatable and flawed. There's no Mary Sue's or no idealized versions of myself. We're going to make everyone flawed and everyone relatable, and everyone have a barb to throw. And I thought, I'm just going to try to populate my pages with that, and then at the end, I had a sense of where the plot was going to go, but it was a very organic process and sometimes a meandering process to get there. And then after that, I had to go through and make it seem like it was intentional the whole way through. But I work maniacally. I'll work at 4:30 in the morning. I'll work at midnight. I'll wake up. I'll have a sleepless night. I always endeavor to write 1,500 words a day, which I know is a trope, but like I could not fall asleep unless I wrote those words, and I would write them anywhere, whether or not that was at a bar top while some strange gentleman was talking to me, or and I was dividing my attention, or whether or not that was while I was trail running and possibly imperiling my life, because the idea came to me then. And so it was a collage of context where I was writing it, but always trying to write a fantasy that I would have loved as a reader, even if it was catnip to my darker, shadowy side. And so I think at the end, a dark fantasy emerged from that, and I think that would have happened if I had written a fantasy at any moment in my life. It would have been dark.
I love it. I love your enthusiasm, and I can just tell that your book is going to be full of snark, and I love it. I also know if I just go by him, he's going to give me a free copy. So yeah. I know that. So we're kind of wrapping up, but we have time to go around again. And what I would like for each of you to do, this is the hard part of how we do things in America. You do one thing, and Em is here to prove it. We want a sequel. So I would like each of you to say what you're thinking about for your next book, but also tell us where we can get your book and where we can follow you. And I'm going to beg everyone who is listening to this, buy their books. It's going to make a difference for them. Amazon or big companies, they don't care. It's us small people who care. So I don't think we ever let Doug go first. So we're going to start with Doug first. Doug, tell us if you have an idea for a next one, and then tell us where we can get this one.
Well, my book is a one-off. I don't have any desire. I think that character story is told, and I'm done. I do have it. I'm kicking around an idea that I've had for a very long time as well. That's sort of a love story. It's a rom-com basically set against the Reagan-Gorbachev summit in Iceland, in the at the thaw of the Cold War. And part of it is because I have this great passion for Iceland, and I've been there a bunch of times, but I heard some quirky stories when I was over there once that I thought, boy, this would make a great story. So I might do that. In the meantime, Frank Shadow, I'm basically been very busy promoting. We did a book tour on the East Coast and a lot of events out here in Southern California and a couple more. So it's available at Amazon, of course, and also at barnesandnoble.com, as well as a bunch of good independents. And on my website, if people are interested in signed copies, I sell it through my own website at dougmcintyre.com, spelled my way, not the way Reba McEntire spells it, but it's MCINTYRE. I'm looking at in 2024. This one is finally out of my. It's out into the world, and very soon, even the aggressive marketing portion of it will be over with, and it'll be maintenance from that point on. And then I'm really going to turn to, because I think, like Jonathan, I have to stay busy, or I'll just really, my wife will have to kill me, basically. And she'd be justified in doing so, I'd like to point out. But so I have to stay busy. So I need some reason to come out here into my little writer shed. And just to kill a couple hours a day.
Understandable. Em?
Comfort Sequels comes out next year. Comes out September 2024. And it's available on Tucker DS Press website. And that's the indie publisher that you can pre-order your copy now. And you should. And also the cover is amazing. My friend drew it. And it's all the things you want about movie sequels. There's Falcor flying in the background. There's Gizmo down at the bottom. There's just really, really cute things going on in that. And in terms of next projects, I am co-authoring a book on trauma and Twin Peaks, the TV show I mentioned earlier is my favorite TV show. So again, sort of like venturing into pop culture and psychology. And I'm going to play with an idea of doing a follow-up book called Comfort Musicals, where I talk about musicals I love from the 40s and 50s, specifically Rodgers and Hammerstein genre, but not just, and what those musicals meant to me watching them in different times. So that's what I'm thinking.
And you better have Guys and Dolls in that one.
That's obvious, yes.
Jonathan?
Let's see. So the Amber Menhir, Menhir, like the weird standing stones, debuts this fall, and the sequel is in draft, as is its sequel thereafter. But I'm going through that culling stage of content. It's available on Barnes and Noble and Kobo and my website, theshadowsofthemonolith.com or shadowsofthemonolith.com. We'll take it to the same place, which is the name of the whole series. There will be 5 of them. The next 2 are drafted. I'm making good progress. And yeah, there's a fair bit of media coverage prepared for it in the fall, and I'm getting prepared for my life transitioning in that endeavor. But it's going to be a fun ride, and I hope people like it. The Sun, which is like the British tabloid, which actually serves also as like a news source in England, says that it's a lot of fun. And so, like, if a tabloid's saying it's a lot of fun and it's filled with like snark, it probably is.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Kellyanne?
Well, first I want to say how great I just think this panel is fantastic. You guys have really been fun to sit here with. So thank you for that. Now, as far as I go, my gosh, I have so much more. I capped it at 31, one for every day of the month for a child, one for every day of the month. And gosh, I got more. I mean, I got a lot more where that came from. And so I'm hoping, I'm going to let the 31 settle in. I just completed audio and video for all 31. They're all on audiobook.
And that's at Amplify, A-M-P capitalized, Amplify. Pro Audio Voices is the company I work with, fantastic, out of Oregon. And all 31 are now on audio, and they're incredible. My narrator is amazing. The music and the sound effects bring the books to life in a way that you couldn't even imagine. And, if you go to the amplify.com site, you can buy my different series. So you can actually get all 31 books for like $17. So that's, I'm pretty proud of that, because they weren't even a year old when I was able to accomplish this from publication date. So that felt kind of significant. And thank you. And gosh, so I have more children's books that I'm just kind of keeping in the wings. And then I'm doing an adult poetry collection. I'm curating it. And I feel my adult poetry is going to be really, really interesting for folks. I have a lot of different variety. Started some of my dark night of the soul type poetry, and then sort of coming out of the dark night of the soul. So there's a whole different range in my adult poetry. So that's on the list.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking this 45 minutes to be with us, because I know you could have written 6 more books in that time, and we stopped that. Thank you, all of you. Congratulations to all of you. It's amazing what you've done. People who want to follow me can find me at scottryanproductions.com. And thank you to the Book Fest for putting this on. This is always such a wonderful event, and they have another great panel following this one. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. It was so much fun. And now I got to buy 4 more books and 31 from Kellyanne. I'm so busy now.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.